So now we're going to move on to the gas tank, or more precisely the cover over the gas tank. And as I said, it's got 2 bolts in the back, 2 on the side here. And there's a couple on the inside, and I'm going to try to focus, or see if I can get the camera to focus. Okay. I believe you can see on the bottom there, inside the frame. There's one right here. That one looks like it's going to come off easy. No problem there. I hope I'm as lucky with the rest of them. There's another one up towards the front here. Same way. And then there are these, which that one came easy. I think I'm getting out of the frame of the camera now. Oh, yep. So this one loosened easy, and if all the rest of them are that easy, I'll be ready to go underneath the car and take out. I know I think there's 3 in the back here. But these have to come out. I don't want to jinx myself, but so far they're nice. So I will get those out and then raise it up and get the others that are underneath. So I decided that I would use the air ratchet to move it along faster, and it did. This kind of popped out once I relieved the tension off. Okay, I'm going to go raise it up and get the bolts from the bottom. So this is the underside. There are 5 bolts holding this cover on the side, and then there's 2 more up here, 1 on each side. Going to go get those off, and then that cover will be ready to come off, and we'll see what we got underneath it. Okay, I found 2 more bolts under there. I only have the lift up part way, so it's a little bit of trouble crawling under it. But the 2 bolts I found on each side here, 1 on each side. This is where I already took 1 out from the back, and it's not going to work. Okay, see if I can get this one. The ratchet is too big to fit in there, and I decided so there's a couple of things while I was under there before the air compressor kicked on and made it impossible to lock. I noticed that the gas tank hangers, which are not actually what I'm trying to take off right now, they've got long bolts. There's a lot of rust on them. So while I'm here, I'm going to take a wire wheel and clean up those bolts as best I can. Once I get them all cleaned up, I'm going to hit them with some blaster and let it soak before I take them off. Now the other thing I noticed is, by the way, I took these bolts out with a half-inch ratcheting wrench. The other thing I noticed while I'm here, there's a drain for the overflow from the gas tank in case you spill any. That's got to come off sooner or later, so I'm going to take it off now. And again, put that screw back there so I know where it goes. I'll take the rest of these bolts off. And then I'll be ready to go up top and pull this cover off. Okay, normally there would be fuel hoses and vent lines between here and here. I was able to push this up from the bottom, so I should be able to get it off pretty easily. But normally those vent lines and fuel lines would be connected and you'd have to deal with those. But if you've been following all along, you'll remember that I cut those fuel lines to break the suction when I removed the fuel pump. So, there we are. Fuel tank looks pretty good from this side, but underneath at the bottom corners, there's some rust. So this is what the fuel tank looks like from on top. It's much different than the 74. The 74, the sending unit and the supply lines were underneath the tank. On the 76, there's a huge unit that has the float and the pickup, and then on this side there's a supply line. This is a return line that goes back in, and in addition you have a vent line, which for some reason that's not obvious to me, it tees off before it goes into the tank, and one piece of it connects to the tank directly and the other piece goes into the sending unit. Why it's like that, I have no idea, but I'm sure there's a reason. That vapor line went to the vapor canister that you might recall that we took off under the front fender before we took the body off the frame. So for now, I'm going to leave the blaster do its job on the two straps that hold the tank in. Those bolts are about 1.5 inches or 2 inches long. They go up here into the strap that holds the tank on. So I'm going to give that time to work, and what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to work on taking all of the clips that hold the fuel line and the return line to the frame. I'm going to take those off and Let's just point out where they are for now. Get the size of the bolt. They look like 7/16, but there's one here, clip here, clip here, clip down here, and these have been replaced. They must have rotted out because from here to the tank they're copper, and there's union joints, compression fittings. See if I can zoom in on the compression fittings where they joined them. I don't know if I can see them from here. I think I can. There they are. Can see at least one of them. So this is going to get all new fuel and brake lines. There's no point with the difficulty of replacing those with the body on the car. I think that's a good investment to just go and put new ones on. So I'm going to be taking those off. As soon as I find out the correct wrench, I'll let you know. Those are actually half-inch self-tapping screws, or bolts, I should say, I guess, that hold those clips on. Now, sometimes you can get a wrench on around the clip, sometimes you can't. See, the second one is being a problem. Can't get the bolt all the way on, or that socket all the way on. So that's going to have to be loosened at least some with a regular wrench, probably open end, until I can get the socket on it. So that's how those go. Some are easy, some aren't. It's just the way it is. But again, I'm going to replace those fuel lines because when you have this easy access to them, it's so much easier than if you have the body on the car. So it's worth noting on these clips that hold those in place. Notice how it's bigger on the side nearest the bolt that holds it in. So the supply line has to go closer to the bolt, and the return line is smaller, so it goes towards the narrower part of this. The other thing that's worth paying attention to is how these things are oriented on the frame. So all of them are so that the bolt is towards the outside of the car and the actual lines go through the loop that's towards the inside of the car. There are two, I believe, of those clips that are on the inside of the frame. And the rule kind of still applies that the bolt goes towards the outside because that frame at that point is curved to the outside. So if you prefer to think of it as the bolt goes on the top on those, that would apply as well. But the rule that the bolt goes towards the outside still sort of applies. I'm looking at the vent line now on the driver's side. I don't know if I'm actually going to need one of these when I put it back together, because one of the options I'm considering is these C3s with 10% ethanol in the gas are really prone to vapor lock. I've experienced it with this car. I experienced it with the 74, and the solution that I went with on the 74 is I put an external electric fuel pump on with my carbureted version. Problem with the external fuel pump is that the external fuel pump makes a lot of noise. I mean, you can even hear it if you're standing on the sidewalk and I drive by slowly anyways. You can hear that pump going. People have asked me, what's that noise? So one of the options I'm considering for this car, and it's among many, and basically where I'm going with all these options I'm considering is, if I rebuild the engine, I'm considering a new transmission with different gear ratios and a lock-up torque converter. I'm considering maybe putting a new rear end with different gears. So, bottom line is, for the gas tank and to prevent vapor lock, I'm thinking of an electric fuel pump, of course. But the other part of that is Summit Racing makes a fuel injection. It's actually made by Tech for Summit Racing, and you need 58 pounds of pressure on it, unlike the carbureted version where you need 7 to 9 or something like it. And then 9 would be if you really modify the engine. It's a really high performance car. So one of the things, as I said, I'm considering is putting that fuel injection thing on, and there's two options that you can go with regarding the tank and fuel lines. One is a completely new tank with an in-the-tank fuel pump, which would mean that you wouldn't hear it from the sidewalk as you're driving by. It'd be like a modern car. The other option is they do make a integrated fuel pump for this tank that replaces the entire sending unit and filler cap, or filler spout. That one puts out 58 psi, which is exactly the psi you need for the Summit Racing fuel injection. The other one with the new tank puts out more, and therefore you would have to get a pressure regulator and a return line. I've got a question into Summit Racing asking if I used that 58-pound one and it has an internal bypass on the pump, it's internally regulated to be 58 pounds. So if I use that with their fuel injection, I'm questioning whether I need a return line. And if I don't, that would make the installation simpler and less costly, because I wouldn't have to pay for fuel injection line to come, or metal line to come from the front of the car to the tank. So all that's up in the air till I decide how much money I want to dump into this. It would be way more than I could get out of it if I sold it. However, if I've got a new transmission, new rear end, new gas tank, fuel injection, and all that stuff, you know, some new suspension pieces, I've essentially got a brand new car for less than a brand new car would cost. So I'm still pondering that and wondering which way I'm going to go, but those are some of the things I'm thinking about. So I am going to finish taking off the fuel line. I've taken off 3 of them while I was talking. As you get further towards the front of the car, in front of the rear cross member, the brake line is also in that clip with the vent line. So it'll be a start on getting the brake lines out of the car. So I've got the fuel line off on this side, and when I took the vapor line on this side, when I took the fuel lines off the other side, there was still some fuel in one of the lines. So I don't want to use anything that could generate a spark. No power tools. I've shut off the compressor. So I'm going to go after the brake lines with my my flare nut fitting wrenches. Hopefully I can get them off with this. If not, there's a trick that I use all the time. Since I'm not going to reuse the line, and actually if it's frozen on and rounded off, it's probably a good idea to replace it. But if I can't get it off with a flare nut wrench, what I do is I cut the line, and then I use a 6-point socket on it. That actually has never failed me. I mean, if you can get a 6-point socket on it, then I've always gotten it off that way. Only exception to that is brake bleeder screws, which you can break off. I was always afraid to heat that up, but I have seen people do it. So they'll use a torch on it, get it red hot, and take that bleeder nut off. I've never done that. Okay, so this is double fitting, and this one in here is turning. I have to go get a crescent wrench to hold that. I knew it was too easy. So hopefully now that I have a crescent wrench to hold that with, I'll be able to break it loose. Not. I think it can. Yep, it can. So now what I gotta do is finish disconnecting. It's a good idea to leave this distribution block here connected to the frame while you're trying to get these fittings off, because it holds it steady for you. If you take those bolts out that hold it on first, then you're fighting everything. You can't hold it firmly. So that's off. Let's see if we can get these two that go to the master cylinder off. mistake I made on the 74 that I'm not going to make on this one is I used an air ratchet on this bolt and that bolt. One of them came out fine, the second one snapped. So I had to weld a nut on it to get it out. That one's on there pretty tight. Get a way to get some leverage on this wrench. And that's a different size. You gotta have the complete set for these things. Wrench they give you for that other one, you can't get much leverage on it. So I'll have to see if I can find a bar to get more leverage on it. Got one more time with that bar. The wrench is turning on the flare nut fitting, so I'm not going to do it today because of the gasoline spillage, but I'll get to demonstrate how you take them out with by cutting the line off and using a 6-point socket on it some other day. So there are at least 3 so far that I'm going to have to cut off and use a 6-point socket on. The 2 of them that are still attached there. One going to the master cylinder, one going to the front brakes. And the one right there going to the front brakes. I have loosened the hold-on clamps there. I'm working on the front now. The brake line that goes across the front of the car, front of the frame, to get it to the other side. So there's one that was up there, and then there's 3 down here. 1, 2, 3. Another one on the inside of the cross member. Right over there. And then of course the one that goes to the flexible hose that goes from the frame to the caliper. It has to be a flexible hose because the caliper moves when you steer. It's a new day, and the gasoline that was spilled has long since evaporated, so I'm going to cut off those lines where the fittings were giving us a problem. But before I do that, while the car's in the air, I'm going to see how much success I have with the fittings on the rear calipers. Let's see if I can get in here with my flare nut wrench. It is a 3/8. And we're having more success on these. them to work here, you can't get a very big swing on the, not because of the frame of the tire. I guess if I took the tire off, I'd get more. But I'm not ready to do that. If I thought it was going to save me a whole lot of time, I would, but sometimes it's easier to just struggle with what you got than to take a piece off that's going to make it easier. You just got to make a judgment at the time as to how you want to attack it. So this one clearly is broken loose here. I'm going to, I can turn it with my fingers now. Those lines actually look really good. Looks like somebody's replaced them. Might have even used stainless. There's not a bit of rust on them. While I'm over here and I got the camera running, let's see how much success we have with breaking the other one free. At which time, once I've broken it free, I will probably shut off the camera and do the rest of it off camera. And that came off easily as well. So I just wanted to show you the front end of that line. It goes just in front of the rear wheel. And see if I can get close enough here. And the reason I'm saying close enough here is right on the top here. So put some light on it. This little tab right here, right there, is actually a clip that holds the rubber brake line on. Okay, the rubber brake line has a formed end in it that fits into this bracket, and then the clip goes through a lip on the rubber hose, the fitting on end of the rubber hose. And you just pull that clip out, and that might be easier said than done, but you pull that out and it's U-shaped, and that is what holds that rubber line on. These, just like the brake lines in the back, actually came loose quite easily, so these won't be a problem, other than I'm trying to do it left-handed while I'm videoing it, getting the wrench on it, and that is a little difficult. And that brake line comes from, and I say comes from because the fluid is getting pushed to the back, that little junction box, which has two lines, one over here comes from the front, you can, it's easier to, here it is, here's the line. That's the line coming in, it's got a fitting, and then the other line in that junction box goes across the rear end to another box. It's not a junction box, but it does join two lines together. It's just a union for all intents and purposes. And this gives you a better look at what that clip looks like. It's the same thing that holds the front end of it on. As you can see, it just slips under the lip on that brake line, and that's what holds it in place. So I have gotten the two rear brake lines loose. I'm just looking at the condition of these. I don't think I'm going to be able to get these off without cutting them and using a 6-point socket on them. But I will take those two rear lines off first and then try to address some of these other connections. So I've got the camera set up where you'll be able to just see what I'm doing. I'm going to take a 3/8 inch 6-point socket, and I'm going to take my air die grinder, and I'm going to cut the hose off of it, or the tubing off of it. And there you can see why I didn't want to do that while there were gasoline fumes. I'm going to just bend this out of the way. I'll remove it later. I've got a 3/8 inch 6-point socket that very firmly on that thing, and in order to do that right, because the ratchet is too big, it's setting it at an angle, I'm going to use a long extension so that I can clear everything, get it on there firmly. If this doesn't work, then I guess your only choice is vice grips, or stick it in a vise actually and turn the threading after you've taken it off. But as I have mentioned in previous videos, I've never had the 6-point socket fail. So even if you have a fairly decent set of the flare nut wrenches, it can be a beast to get that off. Now, I will show you that from a little bit further angle on one of the front ones that I have to do. But this back one, it was just impossible to get the camera angle in there. But that's how it's done. Yeah, I've taken the other side off and using the same technique, and as usual, it worked. What I'm going to do now is there are 3 bolts here behind the mount for the differential, and over here, right there, that hold on the actual line that goes across. So you're going to see what tools are necessary to take those off. It looks like it might be tough to get into that one. Might need to actually use just a wrench, because there doesn't seem to be room for a ratchet to fit in there. So these are 1/2-inch bolts on holding these clamps. As I said, 3 of them to get the cross line off. No way a ratchet's going to fit in that one. So, looks like it's going to be a wrench. I do happen to have a 1/2-inch wrench with me. That one doesn't look as corroded as these other two, so it should come out fairly easily. These came out pretty easily, even though there was a fair amount of rust on them. And I did something today that I haven't thought of doing any other time, is I brought my ratcheting wrenches from up at the house. I picked just some of the more common ones. Hopefully, with that ratcheting mechanism, it makes them a little hard to fit in. That one was very easy, but the ratcheting is nice, and that's a different kind of clamp there. Let me take it off and bring it to the camera. The others went around the brake line completely, I believe. Let me double check it so I make sure I'm not lying. But they came off with the brake line on this one. Yeah, they're the kind that wrap completely around it. So the one at the center just is a one-sided clamp. So give you something to compare it so you can see it. But it's just a one-sided clamp. The bolt holds this up against the frame, and the line fits in that notch, and it just holds it up against the frame. So that, for now, is it on the back, I think, unless I change my mind and take those rubber hoses off. But those rubber hoses are going to be held in now with just those clamps, and looking at the angle of them, it looks like that it might be easier to knock those off with a screwdriver or chisel or something once the tires are off. The next brake line I'm going to attack is the one that goes into the junction box that splits the two lines between the front and the back. So it's tucked away inside that back upward support of the frame. So it might be a little bit difficult to get the grinder in there, but we're going to give it a go. And I also noticed that that one might be a 7/16, so bring over some other wrenches. want to try to talk over the compressor, but that one was a little tough to get into. If you noticed, I had to put the socket on first, and I tap it on with the ratchet, and it would have been better if I'd used a hammer. But it did break loose. One thing to note that I noticed when I was out there, under there deciding whether to take the rubber lines off first or not, is that they put the bolts, these things in place back there, is actually holding the distribution block and not the rubber line. And it's a little bit of a hassle to get to that, so I'm going to wait till the tires are off and I can just drop the flare nut that was in there. But then I'll knock one end of the rubber line off and I'll be able to put a wrench on the end that's connected to the distribution block, and once I take that off, I'll remove the clip that takes the distribution block off. So next thing is we're going to focus on the ones on the front that we couldn't get to, or couldn't get off with the flare nut wrench. And it's a good thing I came over. I have 1 minute left on my battery, so I'll be swapping that out and I'll be back. I'm going to focus in on the distribution block that sits between the master cylinder and the brake lines that go to the frame, and hopefully I get a good picture of what I'm doing here when I'm taking these off with the 6-point wrench. Really, if you're having trouble taking any of these things off, you know, if you ever have to replace them again or do any work, it doesn't make sense to put them on again, because you're already starting with a half rounded off nut and it's not going to go well. Simply cutting off the line on the appropriate wrench. And when they're a little bit messed up, it might be hard to find it. That's a 7/16. There you go. Simple as that. I think I should have a good video of that technique now. So I've got 3 more lines I need to do that on. I need to do it on this one under here and the 2 that go to the 2 flexible lines that go to the front calipers. So that's that one. The flexible lines that go to the front calipers look like that. And that maybe is the best shot so far that I have of a fitting, or one of those clips that holds these things on. And this one's fairly accessible, so while I'm doing brake lines, I will do a video showing you exactly how that comes off. And
then you'll know.
I hope I'm not going to get in the way of the video of this, but I'll talk you through what's going on here. If I try to just put the 3/8 inch socket on there and turn it, I don't know if you can see it, but this is turning with it. So you need an 11/16 wrench to hold that. While you break it loose. Now that I've got all of the lines disconnected, I can pry this clip out. Pry at an angle that shows you what I'm doing. It's a little difficult, but at any rate, that clip just pries out of there. I may have to block your view here to get it out. Like that, and just slips under. There's a lip in the connector for the line. So that's how you remove those clips and how they hold it on. Another thing I have left on the brake lines is the 2 rubber lines in the back, which come off just with the clips. That's all that's holding them on now. And they are connected to the 2 distribution boxes. And again, if they don't come out of the distribution boxes, then they really need to be replaced. So same technique applies, except that instead of cutting it with a grinder, you can cut it with a box cutter, whatever kind of blade you have that'll cut it. There's one last thing to take off in the front regarding the brake system, and that's the distribution block that's bolted to the frame. Hopefully once I get a little more light on it, the video will be a little bit better. So, brought myself an assortment of wrenches. That's a 1/2 inch. I'm doing this with manual wrenches because on the 74, I hit that with a air ratchet and I broke one of the bolts unnecessarily. These seem to be pretty loose. After the initial breaking it loose, they're coming out easy. So that will be the end of the brake system for now, except for, as I said, later on in the process I will take those 2 rubber lines off of the distribution blocks and remove the distribution blocks. But I'll do that once I have the once I have the wheels off and have a little more room to work. No sense in doing it the hard way. And one thing to note on the distribution block, if you can see it, where the bolts go through, there's 2 spacers They're ridges designed as spacers. They go next to the bracket on the frame. It's time to try to remove the gas tank hangers. I'm trying to focus on them. There's two of them, as you can probably see. I'll kind of point them out. One here, one here. They're pretty rusty and they're long bolts. I guess they make them long so that you can draw the hanger tight by tightening the bolt. So I'm going to focus on the one over there on that side first. This probably is going to be a long, involved process. Because I don't think you can get a box end wrench around it. But I'm going to try. The reason I don't think you can is I don't think it'll fit. See, these won't fit at the top. Oh, wait a minute. It looks like maybe that's bolted on, so maybe you don't even need that. Welded on, and that nut appears to be welded on. So, okay, this was just a test fit for a 9/16. I'm going to go get myself a 9/16 6-point socket and see if we can break that puppy loose. Okay, I've got my 9/16 socket. I've also brought a couple of long extensions because I feel that those extensions will give me better leverage than trying to work up above my head. That one gives it to me about the level of my chin. The longer one is about mid-chest. So I'm going to try that. Let's see if I can break them loose. I might need to get a bar for leverage. Let's turn it. It's going to be one of those long processes where I have to run it in and out. But one idea that I had was if I could get it loose, which I have, and maybe now that it's broken loose, I can probably work with a shorter extension. That might make it a bit easier. But one of the ideas I had was if I can get it loose and get it loosened far enough so that I can get one of my taps on there from my tap and die set, that I might be able to slip it on there and then clean up those threads so that it comes off easier. And once I get to the clean threads, I could just have smooth sailing. So I'm going to work on getting that to where I can get that die on it to clean up those threads. And if I can, I'll show you that process. So it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to get that tap and die or that die in there to clean it up. But what I was able to do is, if you recall, I had cleaned it up a bit with a wire wheel on my drill a couple days ago, but I couldn't get to the back side because it wasn't loosened yet. But now that it's loosened a little bit, I can touch it, the wire wheel, turn it a bit, clean it up. So I can get it cleaned up all around. That's going to help. And once I've got it cleaned up, I'm going to hit it with a little bit of trading oil and set this back to loosen and see how far it can go. Put that in front of the light, didn't I? See how far I can go easily. Now that I've cleaned up the threads a bit better. The die wasn't going to fit in because as I loosen this, the strap actually is raising up rather than the bolt coming down, and it's still too tight that I couldn't actually loosen it like that. Couldn't get the tap in there, the die in there rather. But this technique seems to be working pretty good. Still a bit of work, but I think based on what I'm doing now, I think I can take my air wrench and put it on there, and I think it'll come all the way. What I'm going to do first is tighten it to clear the remaining debris that's in the threads out. Try to loosen it, but this might speed up the process. can see, even tightening and loosening it with the air ratchet didn't help, but it did loosen up enough that I'm going to try to use the die to clean up the remaining threads, and we'll see how that goes. So I did end up being able to get the die on there, and it turned out that trying to hold it with one wrench and turn the other wrench to clean up those threads just wasn't very productive. It was too awkward. So I am going to go with the tried and true method of tighten, loosen, tighten, loosen, tighten, loosen until I get both of those off. So it turns out, in the long run, the best method was to clean up those threads with the bar wheel on the drill and use the manual wrench. Once I got them cleaned well all the way around, it came out pretty easy. I don't know whether on the other side I initially didn't have them cleaned up as well or what, but it definitely went easier once I got it all cleaned up and just use the manual ratchet on it. Now I'm popping these out. A little something to pry them out with. Don't exactly come off perfectly easy, but they did come off. They're actually not in too bad a shape. There is a little rust on them, but they're all right. Who knows, maybe I'll clean them up and reuse them. They're not going to break anytime soon. I love LED lights. You can drop them and they keep on working. If that was an incandescent bulb, that would have been broken for sure. So I guess now I can go around the top and just lift that gas tank off. Okay, the gas tank's ready to be lifted off of the frame. A little bit of gas in it, but not very much. Makes it a little difficult to handle it when it's sloshing around inside here, though. So, next thing is this gas tank support, which is covered with a piece of essentially this tar paper. On the 74, it was all stuck and everything, and it didn't come off in one piece. This looks like I probably can take it off in one piece. On the 74, I just used a simple piece of tar paper that was left over from the roofing job, and it worked fine. It's just there so that you don't have metal on metal rubbing. There's a little bit of tar paper on the back here too. It's a little more stuck than the front one was, but a little persuasion with a razor knife and the front one came off, so I'm pretty sure that's all it's going to take here. Whether or not this one is going to be reusable, that's another story, because in taking it off it might get damaged. a little bit of work like that, and that thing will be off. And after that's done, what we'll do is go after that gas tank support in the middle. So the gas tank support is held on with 4 bolts, 2 on each side. And I can't see it here, but inside this hole in the frame, there's 2 bolts you can get a wrench on. It's going to be helpful to have an offset wrench to get in there because of this lip right here. I'm going to try to clean the threads up just a little. On the bottom. They're 9/16 heads. So I'm going to clean those up, hit them with some blaster, and then go after them with the wrenches. I moved the camera to a different angle so that I wouldn't be in the way. There's my offset 9/16. 9/16 socket. You could use 2 ratchets here, I believe, if one's small enough to get in there. I doubt it half would fit in there, but a 3/8 might. And I will check that for you in a moment. But, there was one nice thing that was on the 74 that they did away with for 76 for some strange reasons, but the bracket itself, the end, the 3/8 ratchet can go in there. Not going to do it that way because this particular one is kind of dirty and there are a lot of mud, I guess. I think I'll get a better. I might need a or for leverage or something here. Just needed to brace the inside, the offset wrench up against the frame. So I am going to take this off, but I'm going to put the nut back on so that it doesn't drop when I take the other side off. That was one nice thing that they had in the 74. They don't have on the 76 here is the, well, I don't need the washers on that. That'll just be more stuff for me to keep track of when I'm taking it off. But 2 of those holes on the passenger side, I believe, were slotted so that you could just loosen those bolts, take these out, drop it down, and slide it out. These do not have that feature on it. It's just 4 holes. So, and that was helpful putting it back together too. But this doesn't have the slots. It's just got holes in it. So after I get those 2 off on the other side, I will just take this off from this side because it's just very loosely holding it on right now. Okay, 2 bolts are off for the other side. Just need to take the last one off here. Which is going to be stubborn because hold it from the top. I like the method on the 74 so much better. Well, it's off. Didn't realize it had come loose. It was just hung up on the bolt. So here's the difference on the 74. This outside bolt here, the bolt hole was a slot all the way. This was open. And you could put the bolt in, and then just the first bolt anyways, and slide it up on there and use it to support it while you came over to the other side and put those bolts in. But they didn't see fit to do that on the 76.